The streets of New York City have always had two faces. One shines in daylight, filled with hurried footsteps, flashing signs, and the constant rhythm of ambition. The other comes alive at night, quiet and unseen, where deals are made in whispers and power moves without leaving fingerprints. In the 1970s, while the world was distracted by headlines and loud criminals chasing attention, another kind of figure moved carefully through the shadows. His name was Vincent Asaro. And unlike the men who chased fame, Asaro survived by remaining invisible. This story does not begin with gunfire or police sirens. It begins in silence. Vincent Asaro was not born into glamour. He came from a world where respect was earned quietly and mistakes were remembered forever. In the neighborhoods where he grew up, survival depended on understanding people, not overpowering them. Strength meant patience. Power meant knowing when not to speak. These early lessons would shape him into the kind of man who could operate for decades without ever becoming a household name. By the time the 1970s arrived, organized crime in New York was undergoing change. The old traditions were still respected, but pressure from law enforcement was tightening. Wiretaps, undercover operations, and informants were becoming more common. Many mob figures made the fatal mistake of becoming too visible, too loud, too reckless, too hungry for recognition. Vincent Asaro watched all of this from a distance and learned exactly what not to do. He didn't chase leadership titles. He didn't crave attention. Instead, he focused on reliability. In the criminal underworld, being dependable was more valuable than being famous. If a job needed to be handled quietly, Asaro was the kind of man who could be trusted. He understood that true power was never announced. The 1970s were a dangerous time for anyone connected to organized crime. Federal agencies were improving their methods, and internal betrayals were becoming more common. Many criminals fell not because they were weak, but because they talked too much. Asaro built his reputation by doing the opposite. He listened more than he spoke, observed more than he acted, and moved only when the outcome was already clear. His involvement in criminal operations followed a specific pattern. He stayed behind the scenes, handling logistics rather than spectacle. While others handled public-facing activities, Asaro remained in the background, ensuring things ran smoothly without drawing attention. This approach kept him out of headlines and off the radar of most law enforcement agencies for years. What made Vincent Asaro different was his understanding of timing. He knew when to act and when to disappear. In a world where impulsive decisions often led to prison or death, patience became his greatest weapon. He understood that silence could protect him better than any gun. During this era, New York's underworld was filled with tension. Alliances shifted constantly. Trust was fragile, and loyalty was tested daily. Asaro navigated these dangers with careful precision. He avoided unnecessary conflicts and stayed focused on long-term survival rather than short-term rewards. While others fought for dominance, he built stability. His ability to remain unnoticed wasn't accidental. It was intentional. He avoided flashy lifestyles and unnecessary displays of wealth. He blended into ordinary life, appearing more like a working-class man than someone involved in organized crime. This made him difficult to track and even harder to suspect. Behind closed doors, however, Vincent Asaro was known as someone who took business seriously. He was methodical, disciplined, and unemotional. Decisions were made based on logic rather than ego. In a world driven by pride, this mindset gave him an advantage. People trusted him not because he was feared, but because he was consistent. The 1970s also marked a time when silence became a survival strategy. With informants everywhere, even casual conversations could be dangerous. Asaro mastered the art of saying nothing at all. Meetings were short. Instructions were clear. There was no room for unnecessary discussion. This level of caution made him valuable to those who understood the risks of the era. While others were being arrested, indicted, or eliminated, Asaro continued moving quietly through the system. He wasn't immune to danger, but he minimized exposure. His name rarely surfaced in public investigations, and when it did, it was often without enough evidence to cause serious consequences. What kept him alive wasn't luck, it was discipline. He understood that power didn't always come from violence. Sometimes it came from restraint. Sometimes it came from knowing when to walk away. This mindset allowed him to navigate one of the most dangerous decades in organized crime history without becoming a cautionary tale. As the decade progressed, The pressure on criminal networks increased. Law enforcement agencies were closing in, and internal conflicts were tearing organizations apart. Through it all, Vincent Asaro remained steady. He adapted to change without drawing attention to himself, adjusting his methods as the environment evolved. This chapter of his life wasn't defined by dramatic moments, but by careful decisions made in silence. Every move was calculated. Every risk was measured. He didn't need recognition to feel powerful. He understood that staying alive and free was the ultimate victory. And while many stories of the 1970s focus on the loudest names and bloodiest events, the real story of Vincent Asaro was unfolding quietly in the background. A man who chose shadows over spotlight, patience over impulse, and survival over glory. This was only the beginning. Nightfall in New York during the 1970s carried a certain weight. The city never truly slept, but its heartbeat slowed just enough for quiet men to work without interruption. Streets emptied, storefront lights dimmed, and conversations lowered to whispers. This was the hour when influence moved unseen, and for Vincent Asaro, the night was not a threat, it was a tool. Unlike men who relied on fear or reputation, Asaro relied on structure. He understood that chaos attracted attention, and attention invited consequences. While others pursued fast money or emotional victories, he focused on system, steady flows of income, controlled risk, and dependable routines. In his world, stability meant survival. The criminal economy of the 1970s was complex. It wasn't just about robberies or illegal gambling. It was about logistics, connections, and trust. Goods had to move. Money had to circulate. People had to be managed without drawing notice. Asaro found his place in this ecosystem not by force but by function. He became someone who could quietly make things work. Meetings were rarely dramatic. There were no grand speeches or emotional displays. Conversations were short, deliberate, and often conducted in locations that appeared ordinary. A diner at closing time, a quiet parking lot, a back room that smelled of coffee and old wood. These settings weren't chosen by accident. They were chosen because they blended into everyday life. Asaro had a talent for making himself forgettable. He dressed plainly, spoke calmly, and avoided drawing attention. This wasn't weakness, it was camouflage. In a city overflowing with personalities, the most dangerous individuals were often the ones no one remembered seeing. Trust in the underworld was fragile. Betrayal was common, and loyalty could disappear overnight. Asaro navigated this reality with caution. He never revealed more than necessary, and never assumed anyone's intentions were pure. At the same time, he understood that isolation was dangerous. Balance was essential. He built relationships slowly, allowing time to test people's consistency. A person who remained reliable over time was far more valuable than someone who talked big. This mindset shaped how Asaro operated. He preferred long-term associations over risky alliances, choosing predictability over excitement. Money moved through many hands in the 1970s, and where money moved, problems followed. Arguments over percentages, territories, and responsibilities could escalate quickly. Asaro avoided becoming emotionally involved in these disputes. He approached them like calculations, removing personal feelings from the equation. This made him useful during tense situations, as he could speak without inflaming egos. Violence was always a possibility, but it was never the first solution. For Asaro, violence was a last resort, something that disrupted operations and attracted unwanted attention. His preference for subtlety kept him alive during a time when many others met violent ends. Law enforcement pressure was increasing. Surveillance technology was improving, and informants were becoming more common. Even a careless sentence could lead to serious consequences. Asaro adapted by becoming even more reserved. He learned how to communicate efficiently, sometimes using gesture or brief phrases that carried clear meaning without explanation. His daily life appeared ordinary. He moved through the city like any other resident, following routines that blended into the background. This consistency was intentional. Unpredictability raised suspicion. Predictability allowed him to disappear into the crowd. Behind this calm exterior was a mind constantly evaluating risk. Every decision was measured. Every opportunity weighed against potential consequences. Asaro understood that saying no was sometimes more powerful than saying yes. Turning down the wrong opportunity could mean the difference between freedom and prison. The city itself was changing. Economic struggles, political tension, and rising crime created an atmosphere of uncertainty. Many people reacted emotionally, making desperate choices. Asaro remained steady. He believed panic was contagious, and he refused to let it influence his decisions. Information was currency. Knowing what was happening without being directly involved was invaluable. Asaro developed a habit of listening more than speaking, absorbing details others overlooked. Patterns mattered. Changes in behavior mattered. Silence often revealed more than words. His reputation grew quietly, not as a headline figure, but as someone dependable. When a situation required discretion, his name surfaced. When something needed to be handled without noise, he was considered. This kind of reputation didn't spread through stories, it spread through results. Sleep came easily to those who trusted their own discipline. Asaro rested knowing he had minimized risks and avoided unnecessary exposure. He didn't chase danger, he managed it. This mindset allowed him to endure while others burned out quickly. The 1970s were unforgiving. Mistakes were permanent, and second chances were rare. Asaro survived, not because he was fearless, but because he respected consequences. He treated every move as permanent, every decision as final. In a world filled with loud ambition, his quiet approach stood out to those who understood power. He wasn't chasing control, he was maintaining balance. And in the shadows of a restless city, balance was everything. As nights passed and years moved forward, Vincent Asaro continued operating without spectacle, no headlines. No public tramps, just a steady presence beneath the surface, shaping outcomes without leaving traces. And in that silence, his true strength remained hidden. Morning light revealed a city pretending to be ordinary. Store owners lifted metal gates, buses sighed at corners, and the smell of coffee drifted through narrow streets. To most people, it was just another day. To men who understood the hidden economy of New York, it was a carefully staged performance. Vincent Asaro moved through this daylight world without disruption, carrying himself as someone who belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. He believed that daylight was more dangerous than darkness. At night, people expected shadows. During the day, they expected honesty. That expectation made people careless. Asaro used daylight to observe, to test assumptions, and to measure the rhythm of the city as it truly was. He paid attention to patterns others ignored, the same faces appearing at the same hours, the same cars circling the same blocks, the subtle changes that suggested pressure or opportunity. Patience defined his routine. He did not rush from place to place. Movement without purpose was noise, and noise invited curiosity. Each stop had a reason, even if that reason was simply to be seen doing something normal. Normality was his strongest disguise. In the 1970s, the criminal landscape was shaped as much by personality as by power. Some men believed intimidation was enough to secure loyalty. Others relied on generosity, spending money to buy respect. Asaro chose a different path. He believed consistency created trust, and trust outlasted fear. He showed up when expected. He delivered what he promised. He avoided drama. Over time, this reliability became his signature. Conversations were measured. He avoided emotional language and never revealed more than necessary. Words were tools, not expressions. A single sentence could carry weight if chosen carefully. Silence, when used correctly, carried even more. Many misunderstandings were avoided, simply because he refused to fill empty space with unnecessary talk. Risk management governed every decision. He assessed environments before entering them, noting exits, sight lines, and behavior. This wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. The city rewarded those who anticipated problems before they appeared. Asaro treated awareness like a habit, something practiced daily until it became instinct. Money, though essential, was never the goal by itself. He understood that chasing profit without structure led to exposure. Income needed to be steady, not spectacular. Sudden changes drew attention, and attention disrupted balance. He preferred operations that blended into existing systems, where transactions appeared ordinary and unremarkable. Trust, once established, was guarded carefully. He did not expand his circle quickly. New associations were tested through time and observation rather than promises. People revealed themselves eventually through impatience, greed, or carelessness. Asaro waited for those moments, letting others disqualify themselves. The city responded to pressure in predictable ways. When law enforcement intensified, people became nervous. Nervous people made mistakes. Asaro anticipated these cycles and adjusted his behavior accordingly. He reduced movement, simplified routines, and allowed tension to pass without reacting to it. Waiting was often safer than acting. Public places offered anonymity if used correctly. Crowds hid individuals, and routine masked intention. Asaro understood how to be present without being noticed. He matched the energy of his surroundings, never standing out, never disappearing entirely. This balance allowed him to move freely without leaving impressions. At times, situations demanded firmness. When boundaries were tested, he responded calmly but decisively. He believed clarity prevented escalation. By addressing issues early and without emotion, he avoided situations that could spiral into conflict. This approach earned respect from those who valued stability over spectacle. Information flowed constantly through the city, but not all of it was reliable. Asaro developed a sense for filtering noise from signal. Rumors were common, patterns were rare. He paid attention to repetition, to details that appeared independently from multiple sources. Those details mattered. Sleep came with discipline. Rest was not a luxury but a requirement. A tired mind made poor decisions, and poor decisions carried consequences. Asaro protected his routines, understanding that consistency extended beyond business into personal habits. Stability in one area supported stability in all others. He avoided indulgence. Excess dulled awareness and created vulnerabilities. Many men believed rewards justified risk, but Asaro believed restraint preserved longevity. He measured success not by immediate gain, but by continued freedom. The city tested everyone eventually. Unexpected events disrupted plans, forcing rapid adjustment. Asaro met these moments with calm evaluation rather than panic. He believed that fear narrowed perspective, while calm expanded options. Even when outcomes were uncertain, clarity allowed better choices. Time passed quietly. Days blended into weeks, weeks into years. Through it all, Asaro remained a steady presence beneath the surface. He didn't need recognition to confirm his influence. Those who mattered knew his value, and that was enough. His approach shaped the way others interacted with him. People spoke carefully, knowing he listened closely. They prepared before meetings, knowing he respected efficiency. Over time, this mutual understanding reduced friction. Fewer misunderstandings meant fewer risks. The city continued evolving. New pressures emerged, and old methods lost effectiveness. Asaro adapted without resistance, changing tactics without changing principles. Flexibility without desperation kept him relevant while others struggled to keep pace. In a world driven by impulse, his discipline stood apart. He understood that power was not loud, and control was not dramatic. True influence operated quietly, shaping outcomes without revealing its source. As evening approached and daylight faded, the city prepared for another restless night. Lights flickered on, streets filled again, and shadows reclaimed their space. Vincent Asaro moved with the same calm he carried through the day, blending into the rhythm of a city that never stopped testing those who lived within it. And in that rhythm his silence continued to protect him, guiding each step with measured intent and quiet resolve. Evenings in New York carried a softer tension, the kind that settled between streetlights and storefront reflections. The city slowed just enough to reveal its hidden mechanics. This was the hour when intentions became clearer, when people revealed who they truly were once the day's performance ended. Vincent Asaro understood this transition well. He treated twilight as a moment of recalibration, a time to reassess without urgency. He believed that every environment spoke its own language. The tone of a neighborhood changed with the light, and behavior followed patterns that repeated nightly. By paying attention to these rhythms, Asaro could anticipate movement without needing confirmation. He trusted observation over assumption, letting the city tell him what it was ready to reveal. His interactions during these hours were deliberate. Meetings were arranged to coincide with routine, not interrupt it. A casual walk, a brief stop, a short exchange that appeared unremarkable to anyone watching. The goal was never secrecy through hiding, but secrecy through normality. When everything looked ordinary, nothing attracted scrutiny. The underworld relied heavily on timing. Acting too early created exposure. Acting too late created loss. Asaro trained himself to recognize the narrow window where action was safest. This wasn't intuition alone. It was the result of repeated observation and disciplined restraint. He waited until conditions aligned, then moved without hesitation. Reputation traveled quietly. It did not arrive with stories or exaggeration, but through consistent outcomes. People learned that when Asaro was involved, complications were minimized. This reliability reduced resistance. Cooperation became easier when unpredictability was removed. He avoided unnecessary emotion in all dealings. Anger clouded judgment, excitement invited carelessness, and fear distorted reality. Calmness, on the other hand, allowed him to see situations clearly. He practiced emotional neutrality not because he lacked feeling, but because he valued clarity above expression. The city offered constant reminders of consequence. Sirens echoed in the distance. Headlines changed daily. Familiar faces disappeared without explanation. Asaro treated these signs as lessons rather than warnings. Each outcome reinforced the importance of discretion and patience. Money moved steadily through the city, but not all movement was visible. Some flows were subtle, embedded within legitimate-looking activity. Asaro preferred these channels. They required planning, coordination, and trust, but they rewarded discretion. Loud operations burned bright and faded quickly. Quiet ones endured. He understood that loyalty was tested over time, not through words. Promises were easy to make and easier to break. Behavior, however, revealed intent. Asaro observed how people responded under pressure, how they handled delays, and how they reacted when things did go as planned. Those reactions told him everything he needed to know. Even small details mattered. A change in routine, an unexpected absence, a shift in tone, these were signals. Asaro trained himself to notice them without drawing attention. He rarely confronted issues directly unless necessary. Often, simply adjusting his own behavior was enough to neutralize potential problems. The city's noise faded as night deepened, replaced by a quieter intensity. This was the moment when mistakes became more costly. Fatigue set in, and discipline weakened. Asaro compensated by simplifying decisions. He reduced variables, limited exposure, and relied on established patterns. Complexity increased risk. Simplicity preserved control. He maintained boundaries carefully. Personal life and business never overlapped. This separation protected both. Familiarity created vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities were exploited quickly. By keeping his worlds distinct, Asaro limited the damage any single mistake could cause. Trust in oneself was as important as trust in others. Asaro relied on his judgment, refined through years of careful observation. He accepted responsibility for his choices without externalizing blame. This accountability kept him grounded and prevented the rationalizations that led others into danger. Adaptation was constant. The city changed, people changed, and methods evolved. Asaro adjusted without nostalgia. He respected tradition, but refused to be constrained by it. When circumstances shifted, he shifted with them, preserving core principles while updating tactics. He believed that attention was a liability. The more visible someone became, the more pressure followed. Asaro intentionally limited his exposure, allowing others to occupy the spotlight. This strategy reduced risk and created flexibility. When pressure mounted elsewhere, he remained unaffected. Rest was approached with the same discipline as work. He ended nights early when possible, understanding that exhaustion compromised awareness. Sleep was preparation, not escape. A rested mind recognized patterns more clearly and responded more effectively. As dawn approached, the city prepared to reset. Streets cleaned themselves through motion, and the cycle began again. Asaro welcomed this repetition. Consistency reinforced predictability, and predictability enabled control. He moved through these hours with the same quiet confidence that defined his approach to life. No rush, no hesitation, just measured steps aligned with intent. The city, complex and unforgiving, responded to those who respected its rhythms. And within that vast, restless environment, Vincent Asaro continued operating without spectacle, guided by patience, protected by silence. and sustained by an understanding that true power did not announce itself, it endured. Rain softened the city in ways nothing else could. It blurred edges, quieted footsteps, and gave every street a reflective surface that doubled the lights without doubling the noise. On nights like these, New York felt more honest. People hurried with purpose, heads lowered, minds elsewhere. It was during such moments that Vincent Asaro found clarity. Rain discouraged curiosity, and discouraging curiosity created space to think. He believed environment shaped behavior. Weather, time, and setting all influenced how people acted. A crowded street produced confidence. An empty one produced caution. Rain produced impatience. Asaro accounted for these variables not as obstacles but as tools. He chose moments when distraction was natural, when attention drifted inward, and decisions could be made without interruption. His movements remained unremarkable. There was no need for urgency. Urgency implied pressure, and pressure implied vulnerability. He preferred steady pacing, the kind that suggested routine rather than purpose. Routine made observers relax, and relaxed observers noticed less. The city's systems were layered. Legal and illegal activities often shared the same infrastructure: buildings, vehicles, schedules. Asaro understood how to navigate these layers without disturbing them. He avoided actions that created ripples. The goal was to pass through without leaving evidence of passage. He respected process. Every operation, no matter how small, followed a sequence. Skipping steps introduced uncertainty. He insisted on preparation even when outcomes seemed obvious. Overconfidence was a common cause of failure, and Asaro had no interest in learning lessons the hard way. People often mistook his calm for detachment. In reality, he was deeply engaged, but selectively so. He invested attention where it mattered and withdrew it where it did. The emotional economy was as important as financial economy. Wasting either led to depletion. The city tested patience constantly. Delays were common. Plans changed without warning. Asaro accepted these disruptions as part of the environment. Resistance only increased frustration. Adaptation preserved momentum. He adjusted expectations without adjusting standards. Communication remained precise. He avoided ambiguity and encouraged clarity. Misunderstandings were dangerous, and assumptions even more so. When clarity was possible, he chose restraint. Doing nothing was often safer than doing the wrong thing. Trust, once extended, was monitored continuously. Circumstances changed people. Pressure revealed priorities. Asaro stayed alert to these shifts, not out of suspicion but out of realism. Trust was dynamic, not permanent. He believed that every interaction left a trace. Tone, timing, posture, these details accumulated meaning. He paid attention to how conversations ended as much as how they began. Endings revealed satisfaction or dissatisfaction, confidence or doubt. Those signals guided future decisions. The city's pace encouraged shortcuts. Many people rushed simply because everything around them moved quickly. Asaro resisted this influence. He believed speed magnified errors. Slowing down, even slightly, created room for correction. Night deepened, and the rain thinned to a mist. Streetlights cast long reflections, stretching the city into something almost dreamlike. This quiet transformation reminded Asaro that perception was flexible. What people saw depended on how closely they looked, and most did to look closely at all. He used this to his advantage by remaining consistent. Consistency created predictability, and predictability discouraged scrutiny. When actions aligned with expectation, they disappeared into the background. Financial decisions followed the same philosophy. Growth was measured, not aggressive. Expansion without stability invited collapse. He preferred sustainability over scale, choosing operations that could endure pressure rather than those that promised quick returns. Risk was never eliminated, only managed. Asaro accepted this reality without anxiety. He believed fear distorted judgment, while acceptance sharpened it. By acknowledging danger, he prepared for it. By denying it, others walked blindly into it. Personal discipline extended to appearance and behavior. He avoided excess, knowing indulgence dulled perception. Clarity required restraint. Every choice reflected this principle, from daily routines to long-term strategies. He rarely spoke about the future in grand terms. Plans existed, but they were flexible. Fixation on a specific outcome reduced adaptability. Asaro preferred direction over destination, allowing circumstances to shape details without altering intent. The city eventually quieted. Traffic thinned, voices softened, and the rain ceased entirely. In this stillness, Asaro felt most aligned with his environment. Silence one's emptiness. It was information without distortion. He concluded nights with reflection rather than review. There was no need to dwell on details unnecessarily. What mattered was alignment, whether actions matched principles, whether balance was maintained. When alignment held, sleep came easily. Morning would arrive soon enough, bringing new variables and familiar challenges. Asaro welcomed it, without anticipation or dread. Each day was simply another sequence to navigate, another opportunity to apply discipline. In a city that rewarded noise and punished hesitation, his quiet persistence continued to carry him forward. He did not seek recognition, nor did he avoid responsibility. He existed within the system without becoming defined by it. And as the city rested briefly before waking again, Vincent Asaro remained. What he had always been, a steady presence moving through the margins, guided by patience, protected by silence, and sustained by an understanding that endurance was the truest measure of success. The city learned to breathe in cycles, inhale with the morning rush, exhale as night reclaimed the streets. Somewhere between those breaths existed a quiet interval where intentions sharpened and distractions faded. Vincent Asaro understood this interval better than most. He treated it as a workspace, a mental corridor where choices could be weighed without pressure. He believed that influence was most effective when it required no announcement. People responded not to declarations, but to patterns they could rely on. Reliability calmed nerves, and calm made cooperation easier. Asaro cultivated this calm deliberately, maintaining steady habits that reassured others even when circumstances were uncertain. The city was full of signals, some obvious, many subtle. A storefront closing early. A regular face missing from a familiar corner. A conversation that ended too quickly. These were not coincidences, they were indicators. Asaro collected them quietly, assembling a picture of movement beneath the surface. He never rushed to conclusions. Patterns needed time to reveal themselves. He preferred preparation over reaction. Preparation was silent and invisible. Reaction was loud and exposed. By anticipating changes, he reduced the need to respond dramatically. This approach kept operations smooth and minimized the chances of drawing unwanted attention. Relationships required maintenance, not constant engagement, but consistent respect. Asaro checked in without hovering, stayed informed without interfering. He understood that too much presence could be as disruptive as absence. Balance was the goal, present enough to be trusted, distant enough to avoid dependence. The city rewarded those who understood its tempo. Some days demanded restraint, others demanded movement. Asaro adjusted his pace accordingly. He did not force action into unfavorable conditions. Waiting was not weakness, it was positioning. He paid attention to how people handled pressure. Some became loud, others withdrew. A few remained steady. Those who stayed steady earned his confidence. Emotional stability was rare and valuable, especially when stakes were high. Calm people made fewer mistakes. Money was treated as a resource, not a trophy. It enabled operations, secured flexibility, and absorbed setbacks. Flaunting it served no purpose. Asaro avoided displays that invited envy or suspicion. Quiet prosperity lasted longer than visible wealth. He avoided unnecessary complexity. Complicated structures created confusion, and confusion created vulnerability. Simplicity allowed for faster adjustments and clearer accountability. When everyone understood their role, fewer explanations were needed. The city's infrastructure provided cover for countless activities, traffic patterns, delivery schedules, public spaces. These were neutral elements that could either expose or protect, depending on how they were used. Asaro studied these rhythms, aligning movement with normal flow. Blending was safer than hiding. He respected boundaries. Not everything needed to be known, and not everyone needed access. Information was shared selectively, based on necessity rather than curiosity. This limited exposure and reduced risk. Knowledge concentrated too widely became dangerous. Even silence required discipline. Silence used incorrectly created suspicion. Asaro balanced it with small, deliberate gestures that signaled engagement without revealing intent. A nod, a brief acknowledgement, a predictable response. These maintained connection without conversation. The city's nights varied. Some were restless, others subdued. Asaro adjusted accordingly, reducing activity when tension rose and expanding it when conditions relaxed. Flexibility preserved continuity. He avoided nostalgia. The past offered lessons, not comfort. Clinging to old methods limited adaptability. Asaro respected experience but prioritized relevance. When circumstances changed, he changed with them, preserving principles while updating execution. Sleep was approached with intention. He ended nights with a clear mind, avoiding unresolved conflicts that could linger. Resolution did always mean action. Sometimes it meant acceptance. Rest restored clarity. Morning arrived with renewed motion. The city reset itself, offering another cycle of opportunity and risk. Asaro entered each day without expectation, focusing instead on alignment, ensuring actions matched strategy, strategy matched reality. He did not measure success by dominance but by continuity. Being present tomorrow mattered more than being visible today. This long view guided every decision, filtering out distractions that promised short-term gain at long-term cost. The city tested resolve through unpredictability. Sudden changes challenged routines, forcing rapid assessment. Asaro met these moments with calm analysis, identifying variables and adjusting without panic. Panic narrowed options, calm expanded them. He understood that attention was a finite resource. Drawing it unnecessarily weakened position. Asaro allowed others to attract scrutiny while he maintained stability behind the scenes. This strategic invisibility protected him. Even when pressure increased, he avoided dramatic shifts. Sudden changes signaled vulnerability. Gradual adjustments preserved continuity and discouraged curiosity. Stability reassured allies and confused observers. The city thrived on stories, rumors, reputations, exaggeration. Asaro stayed out of them. Stories created expectations, and expectations created pressure. Silence denied others the material they needed to define him. As night returned, the city softened again. Lights reflected off windows, conversations faded, and movement slowed. In this quiet, Asaro found confirmation that his approach worked. He was still free, still unnoticed, still aligned. He did not celebrate victories or mourn losses excessively. Both were temporary. What mattered was balance, maintaining position without tipping scales. This discipline sustained him through cycles of change. In the end, his power came not from force, but from understanding. He understood people, timing and restraint. He understood that survival favored those who listened more than they spoke, who moved carefully rather than quickly. And as the city continued its endless rhythm, Vincent Asaro remained within its steady, deliberate, and unseen, guided by patience, protected by silence, and committed to endurance above all else. The city carried memories in its walls. Brick absorbed voices, sidewalks remembered footsteps, and windows reflected lives that passed without acknowledgement. In this layered environment, Vincent Asaro moved as if he understood those memories belonged to the city, not to him. He borrowed space briefly, leaving nothing behind. He believed longevity depended on understanding limits, not just legal limits, but personal ones, knowing when to stop, when to step back, and when to let events unfold without interference. Many failed because they pushed beyond necessity. Asaro rarely did. The city, as pressure points shifted constantly. A calm neighborhood could become tense overnight, and a tense area could settle just as quickly. Asaro tracked these changes through behavior rather than rumor. When people altered routines, it meant something had changed. He responded by adjusting his own presence, reducing exposure where tension increased and resuming movement when stability returned. He treated uncertainty as a constant rather than an exception. Planning assumed disruption. Contingencies existed not as backups, but as parallel paths. This mindset prevented surprise from becoming shock. Nothing truly unexpected could destabilize someone already prepared for variation. His interactions remained measured. He avoided familiarity that bred complacency, but he also avoided distance that created mistrust. Balance defined every exchange. He acknowledged others without inviting dependence, supported without controlling, and listened without agreeing prematurely. The city rewarded those who respected its complexity. Oversimplification led to mistakes. Asaro appreciated nuance, the difference between silence that meant agreement and silence that meant hesitation, between cooperation and compliance. These distinctions mattered. Time functioned differently, for emergency was rare. He believed haste corrupted judgment. When decisions required speed, he relied on preparation rather than impulse. Quick action built on slow thinking proved effective. He paid attention to transitions. Moments when people shifted roles, when day turned to night, when confidence faded into caution. Transitions exposed vulnerabilities. Asaro navigated them carefully, avoiding moves that coincided with instability. His sense of identity remained minimal. He defined himself through behavior rather than titles or recognition. This detachment protected him. When identity became public, it became fragile. By keeping his sense of self private, he remained flexible. The city, as systems, transportation, commerce, routine continued regardless of individual ambition. Asaro aligned with these systems rather than opposing them. Resistance created friction, alignment created flow. He moved with the city, not against it. He valued predictability in himself. Others could rely on his reactions, which reduced uncertainty. Predictable behavior discouraged testing. When people knew how someone would respond, they were less likely to provoke unnecessary conflict. He avoided extremes. Excessive caution led to stagnation. Excessive boldness led to exposure. The middle path preserved options. Asaro walked it consistently, adjusting pace without changing direction. Information arrived indirectly. Rarely was it offered openly. He learned to interpret absence as much as presence. What was said often mattered more than what was. Silence carried intent. He believed that every choice narrowed or expanded future choices. This awareness guided him toward decisions that preserved flexibility. Even when outcomes were favorable, he considered their long-term impact. Night brought reflection without rumination. He reviewed patterns rather than events, focusing on alignment rather than detail. If patterns remained stable, details could be addressed later. Stability was the metric that mattered. The city's noise softened, revealing an undercurrent of movement that never fully stopped. Asaro appreciated this continuity. It reminded him that systems outlast individuals, and survival depended on fitting into those systems quietly. He maintained distance from conflict not out of fear, but out of calculation. Conflict consumed resources and attention. Avoiding it preserved both. When resolution was required, he approached it calmly, without theatrics. The city tested patience through repetition. Days resembled one another, tempting complacency. Asaro resisted this by remaining attentive to small changes. Familiarity did not excuse negligence. He understood that respect could be earned through restraint. Saying less, doing more, and allowing outcomes to speak created credibility. Over time, this credibility reduced resistance and simplified interactions. As dawn approached, the city prepared for renewal. Movement increased, lights shifted, and the cycle resumed. Asaro entered this renewal without anticipation, grounded in routine and clarity. He did not seek control over others, only over his own decisions. This autonomy protected him from manipulation. By owning his choices, he reduced dependence on external validation. The city offered countless paths. Asaro chose the ones that preserved balance. He accepted that not every opportunity was worth pursuing. Selection mattered more than accumulation. In quiet moments, he acknowledged the cost of vigilance. Awareness required effort. Discipline demanded sacrifice. Yet these costs were preferable to the consequences of carelessness. He accepted them without resentment. As the day unfolded, the city absorbed him once more. Another cycle began, carrying its own variables and familiar risks. Asaro moved through it with the same steady intent that defined him: calm, deliberate, and unseen. And within that vast, restless environment, his silence continued to serve as shield and compass, guiding each step with restraint and resolve. The city woke slowly, like a giant stretching after uneasy sleep. Delivery trucks hummed at loading docks. Newspapers landed on stoops, and the first trains rattled beneath the streets. In these early hours, intentions were still forming, and decisions had not yet hardened. Vincent Asaro favored this time. It offered clarity before the noise returned. He believed mornings revealed truth. People were less guarded before the day shaped them. Expressions were unfiltered, movements honest. By observing without engaging, Asaro gathered insight without consequence. He understood that information collected quietly held more value than information demanded. Routine anchored him. The same paths, the same timing, the same unremarkable presence. Routine dulled curiosity. When something became expected, it disappeared from attention. This invisibility was earned through consistency, not avoidance. The city's complexity demanded respect. Every action interacted with countless others, visible and unseen. Asaro approached decisions as intersections rather than endpoints. A choice affected multiple paths, some immediately, others much later. He weighed these intersections carefully, preferring outcomes that preserved flexibility. He avoided the temptation to control outcomes directly. Influence worked best when it guided rather than forced. By shaping conditions subtly, he allowed results to emerge naturally. This approach reduced resistance and preserved deniability. People often mistook subtlety for indecision. Asaro accepted this misunderstanding without correction. Being underestimated provided cover. Expectations shaped behavior, and low expectations created space to operate freely. The city's rhythm accelerated as morning progressed. Sidewalks filled, voices overlapped, and attention scattered. In this chaos, Asaro blended seamlessly. He matched pace without urgency, presence without prominence. Blending required awareness, not disappearance. He understood that every environment imposed rules. Some were written, others implied. Knowing which rules mattered prevented unnecessary conflict. Asaro respected boundaries that protected stability and tested only those that limited movement without consequence. Trust was managed carefully. He avoided over-reliance on any single connection. Redundancy preserved continuity. If one path closed, another remained open. This redundancy was quiet, built over time through observation and selective engagement. The city rewarded those who anticipated shifts, subtle changes in enforcement patterns, public behavior, or economic pressure signaled upcoming adjustments. Asaro noticed these signals early and responded incrementally. Gradual change attracted less attention than sudden movement. He believed that clarity came from subtraction. Removing unnecessary elements simplified decisions. He trimmed routines, limited commitments, and avoided obligations that complicated judgment. Simplicity sharpened focus. Conflict was approached analytically. Emotion escalated situations. Analysis resolved them. Asaro addressed issues at their source when possible, preventing growth into larger problems. Early intervention preserved harmony and reduced exposure. He treated silence as a language with its own grammar. Timing, duration, and context shaped meaning. Silence could signal agreement, hesitation, or refusal without explanation. Mastery of this language reduced the need for risky communication. As midday approached, the city reached full momentum. Opportunities multiplied alongside risks. Asaro navigated this balance by prioritizing alignment. Actions aligned with environment succeeded, those that resisted it failed. Alignment required constant adjustment. He maintained personal discipline regardless of external pressure. Discipline was not restrictive, it was freeing. It reduced decision fatigue and preserved energy for moments that mattered. Routine protected judgment. The city's appetite for stories never faded. Rumors circulated constantly, feeding curiosity. Asaro starved these rumors by providing nothing to consume. Absence from narrative protected him from scrutiny. He avoided the trap of validation. Approval tempted exposure. Asaro measured success privately, through continuity and balance rather than acknowledgement. This internal metric shielded him from external influence. As afternoon softened into evening, tension shifted again. People tired, patience shortened, and mistakes increased. Asaro compensated by simplifying interactions, limiting exposure during vulnerable hours. He believed that resilience depended on adaptability. When conditions changed, clinging to old methods created friction. Asaro adjusted without sentiment, preserving principles while modifying execution. This adaptability sustained relevance. Rest was strategic. He protected downtime to preserve clarity. Overextension dulled perception and invited error. Balance required restraint. Night returned gently, reclaiming the city with familiar shadows. Asaro moved with ease, his presence unremarkable, his intent precise. The city responded by ignoring him, a success by his standards. He concluded each cycle with quiet assessment, not judgment, but calibration. Were actions aligned with environment? Were risks managed effectively? If alignment held, nothing more was required. The city prepared to repeat itself, offering new variables within familiar patterns. Asaro welcomed this repetition. Predictability was a canvas upon which subtle change could be applied. He understood that survival favored those who respected systems rather than challenged them openly. By working within the city's rhythms, he avoided unnecessary friction and preserved autonomy. And as lights dimmed and voices faded, Vincent Asaro remained exactly where he intended to be, present without prominence, influential without exposure, guided by patience and sustained by silence. The city carried its own logic, a quiet arithmetic of cause and effect that rewarded attention and punished assumption. Vincent Asaro trusted this logic. He did not fight it or romanticize it, he studied it. Where others relied on impulse or bravado, he relied on sequence, what came before, what followed after, and what remained unchanged in between. He believed that most failures were not sudden. They were prepared in advance by small, ignored details, a pattern overlooked, a habit allowed to slip, a boundary tested once too often. Asaro protected himself by treating small details as significant. He noticed when tone shifted in conversation, when timing drifted, when expectations quietly changed. These signals mattered more than dramatic events. Movement through the city demanded awareness without tension. He practiced a kind of relaxed vigilance, attentive but not rigid. Rigid attention broke under pressure, relaxed attention adapted. This balance allowed him to respond smoothly when circumstances shifted. He avoided collecting favors he could not repay. Obligation created leverage, and leverage invited manipulation. When exchanges occurred, they were clear and contained. Clean edges reduced misunderstanding. He preferred agreements that ended cleanly rather than arrangements that lingered indefinitely. The city's economy, both visible and hidden, thrived on a momentum. Interruptions created friction, and friction drew notice. Asaro favored continuity. He ensured that transitions happened quietly, without disruption. When something needed to change, he adjusted incrementally rather than abruptly. He understood that people often revealed priorities through what they protected. Some guarded money. Others guarded reputation. A few guarded routine. By observing these protections, Asaro learned how to interact without provoking resistance. He spoke to priorities rather than personalities. Silence for him was not avoidance. It was selection. He chose when to speak and when not to, understanding that words, once released, could not be retrieved. Careful selection preserved options. He did not explain himself unnecessarily. Explanation invited scrutiny. He maintained a narrow focus. Distractions diluted judgment. By limiting attention to essential variables, he reduced noise and improved clarity. This focus allowed him to see solutions others missed, not because he was smarter, but because he was less distracted. The city's unpredictability tested consistency. Sudden changes challenged routine, tempting reaction. Asaro countered this by reinforcing fundamentals: timing, discretion, and restraint. When uncertainty increased, he simplified. Simplicity restored control. He avoided extremes of optimism and pessimism. Optimism encouraged risk. Pessimism encouraged paralysis. Neutral assessment encouraged adjustment. Asaro aimed for neutral clarity, allowing facts to guide decisions without emotional distortion. His interactions carried an unspoken contract: efficiency without pressure. He respected others' time and expected the same. This mutual respect reduced friction and discouraged unnecessary engagement. Short interactions left less to misinterpret. He treated reputation as a byproduct, not a goal. Chasing reputation created exposure. Maintaining behavior created credibility. Over time, credibility reduced the need for explanation. People adjusted expectations without prompting. The city offered countless chances to overreach. Ambition tempted expansion beyond control. Asaro resisted this temptation. He expanded only when capacity supported it. Growth without stability invited collapse. He understood that alignment mattered more than speed. Fast movement in the wrong direction wasted energy. Slow movement, aligned with conditions, conserved it. Asaro chose alignment consistently. Even setbacks served a purpose. They revealed weaknesses without destroying structure. Asaro used these moments to recalibrate rather than react. Correction replaced blame. Adjustment replaced regret. He avoided dependency on circumstance. When conditions were favorable, he prepared for change. When conditions were unfavorable, he preserved resources. This balance prevented overcommitment during good times and desperation during bad ones. The city's tempo shifted as evening approached. Energy condensed, patience shortened, and errors multiplied. Asaro compensated by narrowing focus and reducing exposure. He preferred to observe during volatile hours rather than act. He believed that endurance required humility. Overconfidence invited correction. Humility preserved learning. Asaro remained open to adjustment, treating certainty as provisional rather than absolute. His routines remained steady. Consistency reduced cognitive load and freed attention for anomaly detection. When something deviated, it stood out clearly against a stable background. The city's stories circulated endlessly, feeding curiosity and fear. Asaro ignored them. Stories distorted reality. Patterns clarified it. He trusted patterns. He avoided dramatic conclusions. Decisions rarely ended with finality, they evolved. Asaro allowed outcomes to settle naturally, intervening only when alignment faltered. As night deepened, the city softened, movement slowed, and noise thinned. In this quiet, Asaro assessed alignment once more. Balance held. Exposure remained low. Continuity persisted. He accepted that invisibility required effort. Remaining unnoticed demanded discipline, restraint, and patience. These costs were paid daily, without complaint, because the alternative was far more expensive. He did not seek to dominate environments. He sought to fit within them without friction. This approach preserved autonomy and reduced resistance. The city reset itself again, preparing for another cycle. Asaro moved with it. Unchanged in principle, adaptive in execution, he trusted the process he had built, knowing that consistency compounded quietly over time. And with that steady rhythm, Vincent Asaro continued forward, measured, deliberate, and unseen, guided by clarity, protected by restraint, and sustained by the understanding that true strength endured precisely because it did not announce itself. The city, as energy thinned late at night, not disappearing but settling into something more deliberate. Neon signs buzzed softly, windows reflected passing headlights, and the constant motion slowed into purposeful steps. In these hours, decisions carried more weight. Vincent Asaro preferred this stillness. It stripped away noise and revealed intention. He believed that clarity arrived when distractions faded. Late nights encouraged honesty, not because people wanted to be honest, but because exhaustion loosened control. Words slipped. Habits changed. Small mistakes surfaced. Asaro observed these moments carefully, not to exploit weakness, but to understand reality without performance. He avoided attachment to outcomes. Fixation narrowed perspective. By focusing on process instead, he preserved adaptability. When results arrived, they were evaluated calmly, without celebration or regret. Both emotions distorted judgment. The city functioned through overlapping systems. Transportation, commerce, routine, and expectation all intersected. Asaro navigated these intersections with respect. He understood that disrupting one system rippled into others. Minimal disturbance preserved balance. He practiced restraint in speech. Conversations remained efficient, stripped of unnecessary detail. He trusted that those who needed information would recognize it without elaboration. Over-explaining suggested insecurity. Brevity suggested confidence. The city tested patience through repetition. Similar days tempted complacency. Asaro resisted by remaining attentive to subtle deviation. Familiarity did not equal safety. In fact, familiarity often concealed risk. He stayed alert without becoming rigid. He avoided personal displays of power. Authority expressed openly invited challenge. Authority expressed quietly discouraged it. Asaro allowed influence to remain implicit, felt rather than seen. This approach reduced resistance and preserved autonomy. He understood that credibility accumulated slowly and dissolved quickly. One careless decision could erase years of discipline. This awareness sharpened his judgment. Every action was weighed against its potential cost to credibility. Time was treated as a resource equal to money. Wasted time depleted attention and energy. Asaro structured his days to preserve both. He avoided unnecessary engagements and limited exposure to distractions. The city, as unpredictability demanded readiness. Asaro maintained contingency without paranoia. Preparedness was quiet, unobtrusive, and flexible. He did not expect specific outcomes. He prepared for ranges. He valued alignment over agreement. Agreement was temporary. Alignment endured. When interests align naturally, cooperation required less effort and produced fewer conflicts. Asaro sought these alignments patiently. He believed that many conflicts existed only because people rushed to resolve them. Time often resolved tension without intervention. Asaro allowed situations to breathe before acting. This patience prevented escalation. Night deepened, and the city's pace slowed further. In this calm, Asaro refined routines. He removed inefficiencies, adjusted timing, and simplified processes. Continuous improvement maintained relevance. He avoided nostalgia. The past offered data, not comfort. Clinging to former success limited adaptation. Asaro respected experience without allowing it to dictate present decisions. He treated silence as protection. Silence limited exposure, preserved options, and prevented misinterpretation. When silence was misread, he allowed the misunderstanding to persist if it caused no harm. Correction was unnecessary if outcomes remained favorable. The city's stories circulated endlessly. Rumors filled gaps, left by silence. Asaro did not counter them. Engaging stories amplified them. Ignoring them starved them. He believed that strength expressed itself through consistency. Predictable behavior discouraged testing. When reactions remained steady, others adjusted expectations accordingly. He accepted that not every opportunity was worth pursuing. Selection mattered more than accumulation. By choosing carefully, he preserved focus and reduced risk. As night approached its quietest hours, Asaro assessed alignment once more. Systems remained stable. Exposure remained minimal. Balance held. These indicators mattered more than any single success. He concluded nights with calm reflection, not review of events, but confirmation of principles. Were decisions disciplined? Was restraint maintained? If yes, sleep followed easily. Morning would arrive soon, resetting the city's rhythm. Asaro welcomed this reset without anticipation. Each cycle offered fresh variables within familiar patterns. He did not seek to control the city. He sought to understand it. Understanding reduced resistance and increased flexibility. Control invited opposition. The city rewarded those who respected its complexity. Asaro did so quietly, allowing systems to carry him rather than resisting them. As lights dimmed and streets emptied further, his presence remained unremarkable. No attention drawn. No trace left behind. This absence was intentional, and within that absence, his influence endured, measured not by visibility, but by continuity, not by dominance, but by balance. Vincent Asaro continued forward, guided by discipline, protected by silence, and sustained by the knowledge that survival favored those who mastered restraint. The city carried a rhythm that few noticed, a quiet pulse beneath the chaos of daily life. Streetlights flickered. Trains rumbled through subterranean tunnels, and the distant murmur of voices created a low, constant hum. In these spaces, Vincent Asaro moved with a measured calm, aware that every step had consequence and every choice, however small, contributed to a pattern of survival. He understood that the city was more than buildings and streets. It was a living network of interactions, habits, and expectations. Each neighborhood had its character, each street carried a memory, and each person followed rhythms that could be observed and anticipated. Asaro treated this network as both map and instrument, moving along its pathways with precision, avoiding disruption, yet remaining present where it mattered most. Patience defined his approach. Impulsive action was dangerous, and overreaction even more so. He relied on observation, waiting until he fully understood the dynamics of a situation before engaging. By doing so, he ensured that each intervention, when necessary, would produce the intended effect without attracting undue attention. He valued discretion above all else. Visibility invited scrutiny, and scrutiny invited risk. Asaro maintained a quiet presence, appearing only where necessary, speaking only when it added value. This careful economy of movement and communication allowed him to operate effectively while remaining largely invisible to those around him. Relationships were carefully managed. Trust, once earned, was continuously assessed. People were observed through their actions, not their words. Consistency revealed character. Those who remained reliable over time were recognized. Those who faltered quietly removed from influence. Asaro understood that loyalty was fragile, and vigilance preserved it without interference. Information was currency, but not all information held equal value. He distinguished between signals and noise, filtering details to focus only on what was actionable. Patterns mattered more than isolated events. By reading the flow of information over time, he could anticipate changes before others recognized them, moving with foresight rather than reaction. Risk was ever present. The city tested resilience through unpredictability, sudden changes in routines, unexpected confrontations. The subtle pressure of observation. Asaro mitigated risk by minimizing exposure, simplifying processes, and maintaining control over what he could influence. This disciplined approach ensured that his operations remained stable even under external pressure. The city's economy, both legal and illicit, operated on trust and discretion. Transactions required subtlety. Agreements required careful wording. Asaro navigated these systems with an understanding that efficiency was not measured in speed but in reliability and continuity. Quick action without preparation was reckless. Slow, deliberate, and informed action produced sustainable outcomes. He maintained emotional neutrality, knowing that reactions often revealed more than words. Anger or excitement clouded judgment. Calmness clarified it. He observed others' emotional cues, interpreting hesitation, tension, or overconfidence as markers for future behavior. In doing so, he remained unshaken by drama and resilient under pressure. Time was a tool, not a constraint. He organized movements, meetings, and decisions around the natural rhythm of the city. By respecting its tempo, he reduced resistance and blended seamlessly into the environment. Being present at the right moment and absent when necessary defined his operational efficiency. Discretion extended to financial matters. Wealth was a means to an end, not a badge of status. Excessive display drew attention, while measured accumulation maintained security. Asaro preferred operations that produced steady, reliable returns over flashy, high-risk ventures. Stability, he believed, outlasted spectacle. He avoided overcomplication. Simple, repeatable processes reduced errors and allowed for adaptability. By limiting unnecessary variables, he preserved clarity in decision-making. Efficiency came not from cutting corners, but from understanding which corners could be safely ignored and which demanded careful attention. Even silence carried meaning. It could signal agreement, hesitation, or refusal without revealing intention. Asaro mastered the timing and context of quietness, using it strategically to shape interactions while minimizing exposure. When misunderstandings occurred, he often allowed them to persist if the outcome remained favorable. Intervention was reserved for essential circumstances. He observed that the city's energy often dictated human behavior. Daylight encouraged performance, evening heightened tension, and late-night hours revealed truths. Asaro synchronized his actions with these natural tendencies, maximizing effectiveness while minimizing risk. Timing, in his philosophy, was as critical as intention. Contingency planning was constant. Every plan had layers of alternatives. Flexibility was essential because the city, unpredictable as it was, offered no guarantees. Anticipating change preserved control. He did not fear disruption, he prepared for it. His discipline extended to personal habits. Physical and mental conditioning ensured that he remained alert, resilient, and capable of sustained focus. Excess or indulgence dulled perception. Clarity required moderation, and moderation was deliberate. He treated setbacks as feedback rather than failure. A misstep revealed where systems were vulnerable or assumptions incorrect. Correction and adaptation replaced frustration. Continuous assessment ensured resilience. Over time, this philosophy built not only stability but also a reputation for reliability among those who observed quietly. The city's narrative thrived on rumor and spectacle, but Asaro ignored these distractions. Stories distorted reality. Observation revealed it. He trusted patterns, timing, and discreet signals over gossip and opinion. By focusing on what could be controlled and accurately assessed, he minimized exposure to unpredictability that did not serve him. As night deepened, the city quieted, yet its pulse never ceased. Movement slowed, decisions accumulated, and tension condensed. Asaro adapted to these conditions, reducing engagement when risk increased, observing more than acting, and allowing the environment to reveal opportunities without forcing them. He concluded each cycle with reflection, not judgment. Did patterns remain consistent? Were risks contained? Was alignment maintained? If yes, sleep followed easily, restorative and undisturbed. Preparation and discipline, not luck or force, ensured continuity. Morning would arrive again, offering the city its routine chaos and subtle signals. Asaro would navigate it with the same measured calm, the same focus on balance, clarity, continuing to operate within the system rather than above or against it. And as the city's rhythm carried forward into yet another day, Vincent Asaro remained steady, unseen, and quietly influential, guided by discipline, protected by restraint, and sustained by the understanding that true power is measured not by noise or visibility, but by endurance and balance. The city never truly rested. Even in the quietest hours, a faint hum traveled beneath the streets, and distant lights flickered through the fog. Vincent Asaro moved through this rhythm with a calm precision, aware that the environment itself contained lessons and warnings. Every shadow, every passerby, every shift in light or sound carried information if one knew how to read it. He believed in the power of observation over intervention. Most people acted first and thought later. He reversed that order by carefully observing routines, anticipating reactions, and noting subtle changes in behavior. He gathered a level of awareness that others lacked. This allowed him to act decisively when the moment demanded, while remaining unseen the rest of the time. Trust was selective, extended only to those who demonstrated consistent reliability. Words were cheap, action spoke louder. Loyalty was not assumed, it was earned, and continuously verified. Asaro observed people as if reading a map, charting the patterns of alliances, habits, and vulnerabilities. He noticed how stress revealed priorities and how minor disruptions exposed weaknesses. Those who remained steady earned his confidence. Those who faltered quietly lost influence. Every decision had consequences, immediate and deferred. He approached choices with both short-term and long-term effects in mind. Impulsiveness was costly, and even small errors could accumulate into significant setbacks. Asaro preferred measured actions that produced sustainable results, understanding that patience often yielded better outcomes than aggression. The city, as architecture, was more than shelter. It was a system of signals, a closed door, a light left on, a vehicle parked in the wrong place, all carried meaning. By paying attention, he could anticipate movement, identify opportunities, and avoid exposure. The city was a chessboard, and he treated every block, alley, and building as part of a strategic layout. Silence was a tool as vital as action. He spoke only when necessary, and even then, words were chosen for precision. Misinterpretation could create conflict or risk. By limiting communication to what was essential, he reduced vulnerability while maintaining influence. His silence was not emptiness, it was strategy. The rhythm of time guided his actions. The city responded differently at dawn, midday, dusk, and midnight. He moved in synchrony with these natural shifts, capitalizing on moments when attention was scattered, and minimizing activity when exposure increased. Timing was as critical as any other skill, and he honed it carefully. He avoided overcomplication. Processes were streamlined, responsibilities clearly defined, and contingencies built into every plan. Complexity invited error. Simplicity preserved clarity. By reducing unnecessary variables, he allowed focus and discipline to dominate outcomes. Even setbacks were useful. Mistakes and challenges revealed system vulnerabilities and highlighted areas for adjustment. Asaro treated these moments not as failures, but as opportunities to recalibrate. Every obstacle taught a lesson. Every minor error illuminated potential risk. He learned from these without judgment, allowing experience to shape future strategy. The city's pulse was unpredictable, but patterns always emerged over time. By studying these patterns, traffic flows, work schedules, habitual behaviors, he could anticipate activity, identify advantageous moments, and avoid danger. Observation replaced speculation. Routine replaced chaos. He respected boundaries. Not all information needed to be known, and not all spaces needed to be occupied. By carefully limiting exposure, he reduced risk while maintaining influence. Discretion created leverage. Overexposure invited challenge. Maintaining a low profile was as much protection as any security measure. Money was a resource, not a display. It enabled operations, secured loyalty, and allowed flexibility, but flaunting it invited unnecessary attention. Steady accumulation and prudent investment mattered more than ostentatious gain. Wealth was practical, not performative. The city tested resilience daily. Sudden changes, unexpected encounters, and subtle pressures reminded him that stability was temporary and required constant attention. By maintaining discipline, he preserved continuity. Calm, consistent behavior reassured allies and unsettled those who sought to manipulate or provoke. He valued repetition for its ability to reveal nuance. Patterns that appeared uniform at first glance often contained subtle deviation. By observing repetition carefully, he could detect inconsistency, anticipate shifts, and act accordingly. Understanding rhythm was as important as understanding people. Conflict was approached strategically. He did not avoid it out of fear, but out of calculation. When possible, he prevented escalation before it began. When necessary, he intervened calmly and deliberately, minimizing exposure and maximizing resolution. Efficiency defined his interactions. Even daily routines held significance. Meals, meetings, and movements were carefully timed to reduce risk and maintain alignment with the city's pulse. Discipline in small things ensured readiness for larger challenges. Attention to detail preserved long-term stability. He avoided reliance on external validation. Recognition or praise was irrelevant. Success was measured internally by continuity, control, and alignment with principle. This self-contained metric preserved focus and minimized distraction. The night deepened, bringing its familiar calm. The city's tempo slowed, yet subtle movement persisted. Delivery vans hummed. Late-night workers returned home, and distant conversations threaded through alleys. In this environment, Asaro's presence was unremarkable but purposeful. He existed within the system, neither imposing upon it nor resisting it. Reflection guided closure. He assessed whether systems remained aligned, risks contained, and routines consistent. If balance held, there was no need for further action. Sleep followed naturally, restorative and uninterrupted, sustaining him for the challenges of the following cycle. He moved through life as he moved through the city, deliberately, quietly, and efficiently. Presence without prominence, influence without spectacle, awareness without intrusion. In the ebb and flow of streets and shadows, Vincent Asaro remained a constant observant, disciplined, and enduring. And as the city prepared for the next cycle of its endless rhythm, he continued forward, guided by patience, protected by silence, and sustained by the understanding that true power comes from endurance, clarity, and restraint. The city never paused, not even in the moments that appeared still. A faint hum of distant traffic, the occasional flicker of neon, the subtle stirrings of those awake or restless at all, created a backdrop that few noticed but all experienced. Vincent Asaro moved within this environment like a shadow moving along its contours, deliberate, unseen, and attuned to nuances that escaped most others. He understood that survival was a practice, not an event. Every choice, every interaction, every movement mattered not in isolation, but as part of a continuous flow. The city revealed patterns over time, and Asaro read them as easily as one reads a page of a book. He could detect subtle shifts in energy, minor deviations in routine, and hidden signals embedded in the ordinary. Patience was essential. Most people rushed, acting out of impulse or frustration. Asaro resisted the pull of haste. He allowed events to unfold, observing carefully, making note of discrepancies, assessing risk, and preparing response. When action became necessary, it was precise, calculated, and effective. Reaction without preparation was reckless. Anticipation without action was wasted. He balanced both. Trust was extended sparingly. He evaluated people through behavior, consistency, and reliability rather than promises or words. One misstep or inconsistency could quietly diminish trust, while steady performance strengthened it over time. Asaro's network of influence was built on this careful calibration of relationship, allowing him access without exposure, connection without dependency. Observation extended to the smallest details, the way someone shifted weight during conversation, the hesitation in a voice, the rhythm of footfalls on a familiar sidewalk all carried meaning. These cues allowed him to anticipate movement, detect potential conflict, and identify opportunity. Subtlety was a language he understood fluently. He understood the power of alignment. Success did not require confrontation. It required fitting seamlessly into systems already in motion. By observing the city's rhythms, commerce, traffic, human behavior, he positioned himself in ways that minimized resistance and maximized opportunity. Presence became invisible when properly timed and executed. The economy, both overt and covert, demanded discretion. Money and influence could be leveraged only when carefully managed. Display invited attention. Quiet accumulation preserved security. Asaro's approach was measured, practical, and sustainable. He valued steady growth over rapid gain, continuity over spectacle. Silence, strategically applied, was one of his greatest tools. Speaking unnecessarily risked exposure, invited misinterpretation, or created obligation. When silence was misread, he often allowed misunderstandings to persist if the outcome remained favorable. He understood that sometimes not correcting perception could be more powerful than asserting reality. He avoided extremes in judgment and emotion. Overreaction magnified mistakes. Underreaction missed opportunity. He maintained a measured perspective, evaluating circumstances calmly, acting only when alignment with objective outcomes demanded it. Emotional neutrality protected him from impulsive decisions and ensured consistent execution. Time was a resource to be optimized. He synchronized his movements with the natural rhythm of the city, recognizing that morning, afternoon, and evening each carried different energy levels, priorities, and attentiveness in people. Acting in harmony with these rhythms enhanced efficacy and reduced exposure. Even setbacks were opportunities for refinement. Mistakes, challenges, or unexpected shifts revealed weaknesses in systems and assumptions. He used these moments to adjust, recalibrate, and strengthen operation. Learning from failure was methodical, deliberate, and devoid of unnecessary emotion. He valued consistency over visibility. Predictable behavior reduced scrutiny. When reactions were steady, when presence was understated, and when expectations were managed, the city allowed him space to operate. Influence grew quietly, like roots beneath the surface, unseen yet strong. He approached conflict strategically. Avoiding it was preferable, but confrontation was sometimes unavoidable. In such cases, action was measured, minimizing exposure while achieving objectives. Direct confrontation was reserved for situations where silence or subtle influence could not achieve the desired outcome. Routines were carefully maintained. Meals, rest, movements, and observation periods were structured to maintain clarity and readiness. Predictable patterns allowed for attention to anomalies, for recognizing change before it became critical. Discipline and routine reinforced judgment in unpredictable situations. He avoided dependence on reputation or perception. External validation carried risk. Reliance on the judgment of others invited manipulation. He measured success internally by continuity, by stability, and by the ability to navigate the city and its systems effectively without detection or disruption. The city's pulse intensified and ebbed naturally. He moved in synchrony with it, expanding presence when conditions were favorable, retracting when risk increased. Observation remained constant, intervention selective. This balance allowed him to operate with minimal friction. Even small details mattered. An overlooked schedule, a misread signal, a subtle change in tonal could create significant consequences if ignored. By maintaining awareness, he anticipated challenges, adapted strategy, and preserved autonomy. As night deepened, the city's noises softened. Streetlights reflected on wet sidewalks, distant cars moved steadily, and the hum of human activity persisted quietly. In this environment, Asaro's actions were deliberate but unremarkable. He moved with purpose, yet remained invisible, a part of the city's rhythm rather than apart from it. Reflection was a nightly practice. He assessed alignment, consistency, and exposure. Were systems stable? Were patterns maintained? If so, he rested without worry, confident that preparation discipline, and awareness would sustain him through the next cycle. He did not seek domination. Influence was subtle, arising from understanding, presence, and alignment rather than force. The city's systems were leveraged, not challenged. Autonomy and discretion preserved freedom. Through calm observation, disciplined routines, and measured action, he remained a constant amid the city. As shifting energies, presence without prominence, influence without spectacle, awareness without intrusion. Vincent Asaro moved through life and city alike with deliberate care, guided by restraint, protected by silence, and sustained by the understanding that true strength is quiet, steady, and enduring. The city had a pulse all its own, a rhythm that dictated movement, opportunity, and caution. Sidewalks were worn with patterns of footsteps, streets hummed with unseen traffic beneath neon-lit skies, and buildings held echoes of countless lives intersecting. Vincent Asaro moved within this living network with precision and patience, understanding that the city itself was an ally to those who listened carefully and a threat to those who ignored it. He believed in the quiet power of preparation. Success was rarely the result of a single bold act. It was built through cumulative attention to detail, disciplined habits, and the anticipation of variables. Every street, every corner, every familiar voice was observed, not for curiosity, but for its relevance to understanding the currents of movement that shaped the city. As unseen order. Trust was managed like currency. It was extended sparingly and monitored constantly. Asaro observed others over time, noting consistency, reliability, and subtle deviations. Those who demonstrated steadiness and discretion earned his confidence, while those who faltered were quietly distanced. Loyalty was not assumed, it was recognized and preserved through careful evaluation. Observation was central to his approach. He could read subtle cues in the way someone carried themselves, spoke, or responded to minor stress. These observations revealed intentions, priorities, and potential risk long before they manifested openly. The ability to discern nuance allowed him to navigate the city efficiently while remaining largely invisible. He respected the power of alignment, rather than forcing outcomes or challenging circumstances openly. He positioned himself where influence could emerge naturally. By moving in harmony with the city's rhythms, its patterns of commerce, social behavior, and public attention, he minimized resistance and maximized opportunity. Presence was most effective when undetected. The economy, both legitimate and illicit, operated on discretion and trust. Asaro understood the value of measured accumulation over ostentatious gain. Money, influence, and resources were tools to sustain operations, not displays of ego. Maintaining balance in these areas preserved stability and reduced exposure to risk. Silence was both shield and strategy. Speaking unnecessarily could draw attention, create misinterpretation, or bind him to obligation. Carefully timed words, combined with purposeful restraint, communicated intention without revealing vulnerability. Misunderstandings were often allowed to persist if they worked to his advantage, demonstrating that power sometimes resided in absence rather than presence. Time was utilized deliberately. Every movement was synchronized with the city. As natural tempo, mornings revealed unfiltered behavior, afternoon presented opportunities for observation, evenings intensified tension, and late nights revealed truth. By respecting this flow, he maximized effectiveness and minimized disruption. Even minor deviations were meaningful. A shift in a routine, a hesitation in speech, a small anomaly in behavior, these signaled underlying change. Asaro noted these patterns, allowing him to anticipate risk and adjust strategy before challenges emerged. He approached conflict strategically. Avoidance was preferred, but intervention was precise and calculated when necessary. Timing, preparation, and discretion ensured that confrontations were contained, outcomes favorable, and exposure minimal. Direct action was only undertaken when subtle influence could not achieve results. Consistency defined his presence. Reliable behavior reduced scrutiny. When actions were predictable yet unremarkable, attention turned elsewhere. His influence grew quietly, like roots expanding beneath the surface, unnoticed yet firmly established. Continuity was a form of security. Daily routines were maintained with intentionality. Meals, rest, observations, and movement were structured to support clarity and readiness. Routine reduced cognitive load, allowing focus on deviations and anomalies that required attention. Discipline in small matters supported resilience in larger ones. External validation held no sway over him. Approval, recognition, or praise was irrelevant. Success was measured internally through alignment, stability, and sustained influence. This self-contained evaluation protected him from distraction and manipulation. The city's energy fluctuated naturally, and he moved in synchrony with it. Expansion of presence occurred during calm intervals, contraction during periods of tension. Observation remained constant. Intervention remained selective. Balance, rather than dominance, guided decisions. He valued simplicity. Complications increased risk. By streamlining processes, limiting unnecessary variables, and preserving clarity, he ensured that focus remained on what mattered most. Efficiency was achieved not through speed alone, but through disciplined, measured action. Setbacks were interpreted as information. Challenges revealed vulnerabilities, highlighted weak links, and illuminated areas for adjustment. Each obstacle was an opportunity for refinement, correction, and strategic enhancement. Learning was methodical, devoid of emotional overreaction. He respected boundaries, both personal and environmental. Not all spaces needed to be occupied, and not all knowledge needed to be acquired. By limiting exposure to risk, he maintained autonomy. Discretion allowed for strategic influence without unnecessary visibility. Night brought reflection. Systems were assessed, alignment verified, and exposure minimized. If continuity remained intact, he rested without worry. Sleep restored clarity and readiness, ensuring that preparation for the next cycle was complete. The city itself functioned as both stage and guide. By observing its pulse, respecting its rhythms, and responding with measured precision, Asaro maintained freedom within its confines. Presence without prominence, influence without spectacle, awareness without intrusion, this defined him. And as the city, endless cycle carried forward into night and eventual dawn, Vincent Asaro remained steady, unseen, and enduring, guided by discipline, protected by silence, and sustained by the understanding that true strength lies not in visibility, but in patience, clarity, and quiet influence. The city was never truly silent. Even in the depths of night, a faint vibration ran through the streets. Subtle shifts in light hinted at movement, and distant murmurs traced paths unseen. Vincent Asaro moved through this environment like a current threading through water, deliberate, fluid, and imperceptible, yet fully aware of every eddy and obstacle in his path. He understood that presence did not require visibility, and influence did not demand demonstration. Preparation guided every decision. Asaro recognized that outcomes were the sum of countless small actions and observations. Success depended less on boldness and more on consistency, patience, and attentiveness to the unseen currents shaping human behavior. Every block, every alley, every pedestrian step could signal opportunity or caution. By noticing, recording mentally, and adjusting accordingly, he maintained a level of situational awareness that others rarely achieved. Trust was granted sparingly, measured, and maintained carefully. Words were fleeting, actions carried permanence. Asaro evaluated patterns over time, noting reliability, subtle consistency, and deviations that hinted at hidden intention. Relationships were built quietly, with observation as the foundation and discretion as the mortar. Loyalty earned was respected and preserved, while inconsistency quietly eroded connection. He valued subtlety above force. Influence emerged not from dominating a space, but from understanding it, aligning with it, and moving within it seamlessly. The city itself was a living system, and he treated it as both instrument and environment, leveraging rhythm and structure rather than confrontation. Presence was most powerful when unnoticed. Authority strongest when implied rather than declared. Observation extended beyond people. Buildings, streets, traffic patterns, and even the weather communicated opportunity and risk. A light left on, a door slightly ajar, a vehicle parked at an unusual angle, each was a piece of a broader puzzle. By reading these cues attentively, he could anticipate movement, detect danger, and position himself advantageously without drawing attention. Time was managed deliberately. Mornings revealed patterns of activity and human habits. Afternoons provided opportunities for discreet intervention. Evenings intensified tension and required vigilance. Nights unveiled truth. Asaro's movements followed this cadence, acting in harmony with the natural rhythms of the city, amplified efficiency while minimizing exposure. Silence remained a strategic tool. Speaking unnecessarily risked exposure, misinterpretation, or obligation. Carefully timed words carried influence without revealing vulnerability. When misunderstandings arose, they were often allowed to persist if they served long-term objectives. Inaction could be more powerful than action when applied intentionally. Risk was measured, not avoided. He understood that unpredictability was constant, and resilience required careful attention to detail, disciplined routines, and strategic intervention only when essential. By managing risk proactively, he preserved freedom and autonomy, ensuring that the city's movement supported his plans rather than opposing them. Even minor deviations were meaningful. A hesitation in speech, a shift in posture, a change in rhythm, these signals revealed priorities, intention, or caution. Asaro recognized these subtle cues as indicators for adjustment. Anticipation replaced reaction, awareness replaced speculation. Conflict was approached analytically. Avoidance was preferable, but intervention was precise when necessary. Decisions were deliberate, ensuring outcomes were favorable, exposure minimized, and resources preserved. Direct action was never impulsive. It was calculated, intentional, and executed with measured efficiency. Consistency in behavior provided security. Predictable responses reduced testing and scrutiny. When presence was understated and reactions measured, he operated without unnecessary resistance. Influence grew quietly, gradually, like roots spreading beneath the surface, unseen but firm. Daily routines reinforced stability. Meals, rest, observations, and movements were structured to maintain clarity, focus, and readiness. By controlling these small constants, he freed attention to monitor changes in the environment, anticipate deviations, and respond strategically to challenges. External validation was irrelevant. Approval, recognition, or reputation carried risk. True measure of success was internal, maintaining alignment, preserving autonomy, and ensuring stability. Self-contained evaluation protected him from distraction, manipulation, and exposure. The city's energy was constant but variable. It expanded, contracted, and shifted depending on time, circumstance, and human behavior. He moved with these variations, expanding presence when advantageous, contracting when risk increased, observing without engagement when uncertainty was high. Alignment, rather than control, dictated action. He valued simplicity and clarity. Overcomplication invited mistakes, misinterpretation, and vulnerability. By streamlining routines, reducing unnecessary interaction, and focusing on essential variables, he maintained flexibility, efficiency, and operational security. Less was always more. Setbacks were opportunities. They revealed hidden weaknesses, systemic vulnerabilities, and areas requiring attention. Asaro used these moments for refinement, adjustment, and strategic improvement. Learning was methodical and unemotional, ensuring resilience over time. Boundaries were respected. Not every space needed to be occupied, and not all knowledge needed to be acquired. By limiting exposure, he preserved autonomy, reduced risk, and maintained influence. Discretion created leverage, and strategic absence became a source of power. Nightfall brought reflection. Systems were assessed, alignment verified, exposure minimized. When balance was intact, rest was untroubled. Sleep restored clarity, resilience, and readiness for the city's next cycle. Preparation, observation, and discipline were the true measures of endurance. The city itself served as guide and framework. By reading its rhythms, respecting its patterns, and acting with patience and restraint, Asaro maintained freedom while navigating its complexities. Presence without prominence, influence without spectacle, awareness without intrusion. This defined his movement and ensured his longevity. And as the city continued its endless, shifting rim, Vincent Asaro moved forward, quiet, deliberate, and unseen, protected by discipline, guided by restraint, and sustained by the understanding that true strength is measured not by visibility, but by endurance, clarity, and the subtlety of influence. The city never truly slept, though its movements slowed to a rhythm that only the observant could sense. Lights glimmered in windows, footsteps echoed across distant streets, and the faint murmur of conversations blended with the hum of traffic beneath. Vincent Asaro moved through this living, breathing system with careful precision, a figure who seemed ordinary on the surface yet fully attuned to every subtle shift around him. He believed that mastery came from understanding, not dominance. The city, in all its complexity, was neither friend nor enemy. It was a network of opportunities and constraints. Success depended on reading these currents correctly, moving in harmony with them, and avoiding unnecessary resistance. Each decision, no matter how small, was evaluated in terms of alignment with the surrounding environment and potential consequence. Observation was his primary tool. Nothing went unnoticed, from the way people carried themselves to the smallest deviations in routine. A slight hesitation in conversation, the rhythm of footsteps on an empty sidewalk, or a barely perceptible change in traffic patterns all conveyed information about intention, stress, or opportunity. Asaro used these signals to anticipate movement, mitigate risk, and position himself advantageously without ever drawing attention. Trust was a carefully managed resource. It was extended slowly, evaluated continuously, and revoked subtly if betrayed. Words were fleeting, actions carried permanence. Reliability and consistency mattered more than promises. By observing patterns over time, he built relationships based on demonstrated behavior rather than assumption or sentiment. Time itself was an instrument. Asaro synchronized his movements with the city's natural rhythm. Morning hours revealed unfiltered behavior. Afternoon activity presented opportunities for observation. Evenings intensified tension, and late nights revealed truths that daylight often concealed. By moving with this pulse, rather than against it, he minimized exposure while maximizing effectiveness. Discretion was paramount. Silence was not emptiness, it was strategy. Speaking unnecessarily risked exposure, misinterpretation, or obligation. Carefully chosen words carried influence without revealing weakness. Misunderstandings were sometimes allowed to persist if they served a long-term purpose, demonstrating that power could lie in absence rather than assertion. Risk was anticipated, not feared. The unpredictable nature of the city required constant vigilance, careful preparation, and selective engagement. By controlling variables he could influence and adapting to those he could not, he maintained autonomy and minimized unnecessary conflict. Preparation, observation, and discipline formed the foundation of safety and effectiveness. Minor deviations mattered. A skipped routine, a hesitant glance, a sudden change in tone. They all revealed hidden dynamics. Asaro paid attention, making subtle adjustments to maintain stability, anticipate challenges, and seize opportunities. Awareness replaced speculation, and measured action replaced reaction. Conflict was approached analytically. Avoidance was preferred, yet intervention was deliberate when required. Actions were precise, outcomes controlled, and exposure minimized. Direct confrontation was never impulsive. It was intentional, executed only when subtler influence could not achieve results. Consistency was a source of security. Predictable behavior reduced scrutiny and testing. By maintaining understated presence and measured reactions, he operated without drawing unnecessary attention. Influence grew quietly, like roots expanding underground, strong, unseen, and enduring. Daily routines reinforced resilience. Meals, rest, observation, and movement were structured to support clarity and readiness. By controlling these constants, he freed attention for monitoring deviations, assessing risks, and making strategic adjustments. Discipline in small matters created stability in larger, more unpredictable circumstances. He avoided dependence on reputation or external validation. Recognition or praise carried risk. Reliance on public perception invited manipulation. Success was measured internally, through stability, alignment, and continuity. This self-contained metric preserved focus and protected autonomy. The city's energy ebbed and flowed naturally. He expanded presence when opportunities arose, contracted during time of elevated risk, and observed when circumstances required patience. This alignment with the environment allowed him to operate efficiently while minimizing exposure. Simplicity was a guiding principle. Overcomplication created errors, exposed vulnerability, and diluted focus. Streamlining processes, reducing unnecessary interaction, and concentrating on essential variables ensured operational clarity and strategic flexibility. Setbacks were treated as valuable information. Failures revealed weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and areas requiring adjustment. Each obstacle provided insight, prompting refinement and improvement. Learning was methodical, devoid of emotional overreaction, and used to reinforce resilience and control. Boundaries were respected. Not every space needed to be occupied, and not all information required acquisition. Limiting exposure preserved autonomy and strengthened leverage. Strategic absence was as powerful as presence. As night deepened, he assessed alignment. Systems remained stable, exposure minimal, and continuity intact. Reflection was not judgment, it was calibration. If the patterns held, he rested easily, knowing preparation and discipline would sustain him through the next cycle. The city functioned as both framework and guide. By understanding its rhythms, respecting its structures, and responding with restraint and precision, Asaro maintained influence without dominance, presence without prominence, awareness without intrusion, and influence without spectacle defined his movements. And as the city's ceaseless rhythm continued, Vincent Asaro advanced quietly and deliberately, protected by discipline, guided by restraint, and sustained by the understanding that true power is measured not by visibility or control, but by patience, clarity, and the subtle mastery of influence. The city had a rhythm all its own, an undercurrent of activity that persisted. Even when streets appeared empty and the world seemed still, lights flickered in windows, faint engines hummed in the distance, and the occasional footsteps of the night's wanderers traced invisible paths through alleys and avenues. Vincent Asaro moved through this environment with the grace of someone who understood its hidden patterns, the subtleties of movement, and the value of remaining unseen. He navigated the city as though it were a living map, each block and corner carrying cues for behavior, opportunity, and caution. Preparation was central to every choice he made. The outcomes he sought were rarely the product of impulsive action. Instead, they were the culmination of sustained attention, careful observation, and incremental decision-making. Each interaction, each step, each glance contributed to a larger framework of influence. He understood that visibility invited scrutiny and that patience preserved autonomy. Observation was a constant discipline. Nothing went unnoticed, from the way someone adjusted their posture to the faint shift of a shadow on a wall. He could discern subtle changes in tone, hesitation in speech, or variations in routine that signaled intention or uncertainty. Every nuance held significance. Every detail had a role in constructing a comprehensive understanding of the environment. This awareness allowed him to anticipate potential risk and identify opportunities long before others recognized them. Trust was earned and maintained selectively. Words were easy to utter, but action revealed character. Asaro evaluated consistency over time, distinguishing reliability from pretense. Loyalty was recognized and preserved. Inconsistency was quietly observed and factored into decisions about engagement. Relationships were managed strategically, with patience and discretion forming the foundation. Silence was a powerful tool. Speaking unnecessarily could expose vulnerabilities, create obligation, or provoke misinterpretation. By choosing when to speak carefully, he exercised control over perception and interaction. Occasionally, allowing a misunderstanding to persist served to maintain leverage, demonstrate that absence and restraint could be more powerful than direct assertion. Time was treated as a resource to be respected and utilized efficiently. He synchronized his activities with the natural ebb and flow of the city, understanding that different hours revealed different behaviors, levels of attention, and patterns of opportunity. Morning routines revealed human habit. Afternoons were ripe for discreet observation. Evening intensified tension, and late-night hours unveiled truth that daylight often concealed. Alignment with these rhythms enhanced effectiveness and minimized risk. Even minor anomalies were meaningful. A skipped routine, a hesitation in conversation, or a shift in tempo could reveal hidden priorities, intentions, or vulnerabilities. Asaro responded with adjustment and strategy, using these subtle indicators to maintain equilibrium, anticipate challenges, and secure advantage without confrontation. Conflict was approached analytically. Avoidance was preferred when possible, but when intervention was required, action was deliberate, precise, and controlled. Outcomes were achieved with minimal exposure, and direct engagement was employed only when subtler influence could not accomplish the objective. Every step was measured. Every decision weighed against both immediate and long-term consequences. Consistency in behavior provided security. When actions were predictable and Measured, scrutiny decreased, and influence grew quietly. Presence was understated, influence unseen, and power accumulated like roots spreading deep beneath the surface, unremarkable yet enduring. Daily routines reinforced clarity and resilience. Meals, rest, movements, and periods of observation were structured to maintain readiness and preserve focus. These constants allowed cognitive energy to monitor anomalies, detect shifts, and respond with calculated precision. Discipline in small matters ensured stability when confronted with unpredictable circumstances. External recognition or validation held no weight. Success was measured internally by alignment, control, and continuity rather than public perception. By relying on internal metrics, he avoided distraction, reduced vulnerability, preserved the freedom to act according to principle rather than expectation. The city's energy fluctuated, expanded, and contracted in ways that could be predicted by those attentive enough to notice. Asaro adapted seamlessly, expanding presence when conditions favored intervention, withdrawing when risk increased, and observing when patience was required. Movement with the city's rhythm maximized efficiency, minimized exposure, and maintained strategic advantage. Simplicity was central to his methodology. Complexity created vulnerability. Streamlined routines, limited variables, and focused attention ensured clarity and operational flexibility. Efficiency was achieved not through speed alone, but through disciplined, intentional, and measured action. Setbacks were opportunities for analysis and improvement. Mistakes revealed vulnerabilities. Lapses exposed weak points, and challenges highlighted areas requiring adjustment. Each difficulty became a lesson, refining judgment, enhancing strategy, and reinforcing resilience. Emotional reaction was minimized, replaced by methodical observation and deliberate correction. Boundaries were respected both in space and information. Not every opportunity required engagement, and not all knowledge needed acquisition. By limiting exposure, he preserved autonomy and influence, using discretion as a form of power. Strategic absence often carried more weight than visibility. Night brought reflection and assessment. Systems were evaluated, alignment confirmed, and exposure minimized. Rest followed only when balance was intact, providing the clarity and resilience necessary to sustain continued observation and action. Preparation, discipline, and attention to detail ensured stability across cycles. The city functioned simultaneously as stage and guide. By understanding its rhythm, respecting its systems, and acting with patience, observation, and restraint, he maintained influence without dominance, presence without prominence, awareness without intrusion, and action without spectacle defined his approach and ensured longevity. And so, as the city shifted through its endless rhythm, Vincent Asaro moved forward, quiet yet deliberate, unseen yet influential, protected by discipline, guided by restraint, and sustained by the understanding that true power is measured not in visibility, but in patience, clarity, and the subtle mastery of influence. The city was alive with quiet activity. Even in the hours when most slept, subtle signals pulsed through streets, alleys, and avenues. Neon signs flickered, distant engines hummed, and faint footsteps traced the paths of those still moving in the night. Vincent Asaro moved through this intricate network with a calm precision, guided by experience, awareness, and an understanding that the world's patterns were visible only to those willing to watch carefully. He recognized that influence came not from visibility but from consistency, discretion, and careful calibration of action. The city presented opportunities and risks in equal measure, but few noticed them. Those who did could navigate with subtlety, shaping outcomes without fanfare. Asaro thrived in these invisible spaces where observation, patience, and restraint translated into authority that went largely unspoken. Observation remained his primary tool. Every person, every movement, every subtle shift in behavior conveyed information. He could read hesitation, stress, or confidence in the tiniest gestures. The cadence of a conversation, the rhythm of steps, or the tilt of a head offered insight into intention long before it manifested in action. These signals allowed him to anticipate challenges, exploit opportunities, and remain ahead of those who acted without reflection. Trust was never given lightly. Asaro measured reliability and consistency, observing patterns over time. Words held little weight. Actions revealed character. Relationships were nurtured quietly, based on demonstrated behavior rather than assumption. Loyalty earned attention and protection, while inconsistency quietly diminished access and influence. He understood that subtle evaluation preserved stability without confrontation. Time itself was a tool he mastered. The city's cycles dictated energy, attention, and movement. Mornings offered clarity, revealing unfiltered behavior. Afternoons presented opportunities for discreet intervention. Evenings carried tension and subtle risks. Nights unveiled hidden truths, moments that revealed intentions obscured during daylight. By harmonizing his actions with these natural rhythms, Asaro maximized effectiveness while minimizing exposure. Silence was not emptiness, it was strategy. Speaking unnecessarily risked vulnerability, obligation, or misinterpretation. Words were carefully measured, released only when essential. Misunderstandings were often left to exist when they benefited long-term goals. Inaction, when applied intentionally, could be more powerful than any visible display of effort or influence. He approached risk with calculated anticipation. The unpredictable nature of the city demanded constant vigilance, careful preparation, and measured engagement. By focusing on what he could influence and adjusting to what he could not, he preserved autonomy while maintaining control over outcomes. Preparedness was quiet, unobtrusive, and flexible. Even minor deviations held significance. A subtle change in routine, hesitation in conversation, or an unusual pause could reveal hidden priorities or potential risk. Asaro noticed these indicators and adapted, ensuring continuity and stability. Awareness replaced guesswork, and deliberate action replaced impulsivity. Conflict was a calculated decision. Avoidance was preferred, yet intervention was deliberate when necessary. Actions were precise, outcomes controlled, and exposure minimized. Direct engagement was never impulsive. It was purposeful and strategic, deployed only when subtler methods could not achieve objectives. Consistency was strength. Predictable behavior reduced scrutiny and encouraged alignment. Unremarkable presence allowed him to operate freely while influence grew quietly, gradually, like roots deep beneath the surface. Endurance, not spectacle, defined power. Routines reinforced stability. Meals, rest, observation, and movement were carefully structured to preserve focus, clarity, and readiness. By controlling constants, he could detect anomalies and respond appropriately. Discipline in minor matters created resilience in larger, unpredictable circumstances. External validation held no meaning. Recognition or praise carried risk. True success was measured internally through alignment, continuity, and the preservation of autonomy. By relying on internal metrics, he avoided distraction, manipulation, and unnecessary exposure. The city's energy was dynamic. Its ebb and flow guided his actions. Expansion of presence occurred during low-risk intervals, contraction during periods of heightened exposure. Observation without engagement occurred when patience was necessary. Alignment with these patterns ensured operational efficiency, minimized risk, and preserved influence. Simplicity governed strategy. Overcomplication created mistakes and exposed vulnerability. Streamlining routines, reducing unnecessary variables, and concentrating on what mattered most allowed clarity and efficiency. Less was more. Setbacks were information, not failure. Missteps revealed weaknesses. Lapses exposed vulnerabilities, and challenges highlighted opportunities for improvement. Every obstacle provided insight for refinement, adjustment, and strategic enhancement. Learning was methodical and unemotional, creating long-term resilience. Boundaries were essential. Not every space required presence, and not all knowledge needed acquisition. Limiting exposure preserved autonomy and influence. Strategic absence could convey more than visible presence, making restraint an unseen but potent tool. Nightfall brought reflection. Alignment was verified, exposure minimized, and stability preserved. Sleep was restorative, providing clarity and focus for the next cycle. Preparation, observation, and disciplined habits ensured that each day was navigated with precision and minimal risk. The city functioned as both environment and guide. By respecting its patterns, understanding its pulse, and moving with restraint and observation, he maintained influence without dominance, presence without prominence, awareness without intrusion, and subtle action without spectacle defined his approach. And as the city carried on through its endless rhythm, Vincent Asaro remained steady, deliberate, and unseen. He moved forward protected by discipline, guided by restraint, and sustained by the knowledge that true power is measured not by visibility, but by patience, clarity, and the quiet mastery of influence. The city never truly rested. Even as darkness fell and the streets emptied, a quiet pulse ran beneath the surface, subtle yet persistent. Neon signs cast fractured light on rain-slicked sidewalks. Distant engines murmured through tunnels, and the occasional footsteps of night wanderers echoed against the walls. Vincent Asaro moved through this living labyrinth with a calm precision, invisible yet fully present, guided by intuition honed over years of observation and experience. He had learned that the city, in all its complexity, offered lessons to those patient enough to notice patterns, to those alert enough to detect them, and influence to those disciplined enough to act strategically. Vincent Asaro understood the value of restraint. The world often celebrated bold action, noise, and visible influence, yet he thrived in the quiet spaces, in the shadows where subtlety mattered more than spectacle. Power, he knew, was not measured by recognition or intimidation but by endurance, control, and the ability to act without drawing attention. In the quiet moments, he observed the city's rhythm, the ebb and flow of human energy, hidden currents beneath the visible chaos, and the small details that others overlook. Every shadow, every whisper, every minor deviation held significance, a clue to understanding intention, opportunity, and risk. Observation was a discipline. He could discern more in the hesitation of a gesture, the cadence of a conversation, or the alignment of movements than most could in a week of interaction. These cues were not merely information. They were a roadmap, revealing intention, vulnerabilities, and opportunities before they manifested openly. He studied patterns over time, noting subtle inconsistencies, assessing loyalty, and anticipating potential threats. Awareness allowed him to act decisively when necessary, while invisibility preserved safety. Trust was measured, selective, and earned over time. Words were fleeting, actions were enduring. He extended confidence only to those who demonstrated consistency and reliability, while those who faltered quietly fell from favor. Relationships were carefully curated networks, maintained by observation, evaluation, and strategic engagement. Loyalty was preserved not through coercion or spectacle, but through careful alignment of mutual interest, discretion, and shared purpose. Time was treated as an instrument. Vincent understood that the city's hours were not equal in risk or opportunity. Morning revealed patterns in human behavior. Routines made visible. Afternoon presented moments for quiet observation and subtle influence. Evenings intensified tension, revealing cracks in planning and preparation. And late-night hours uncovered truths that daylight concealed. By moving in harmony with these natural rhythms, he ensured efficiency and minimized exposure, making each decision a product of alignment rather than chance. Silence remained one of his greatest tools. Speaking unnecessarily could invite exposure, misinterpretation, or obligation. Carefully chosen words communicated intent without vulnerability, while strategic inaction often conveyed more than action itself. Misunderstandings, when left uncorrected, could serve as instruments of subtle influence, shaping perception while preserving control. Absence became a form of power and restraint a method of dominance. Even minor deviations were significant. A misstep in routine, a subtle hesitation, a shift in posture or tone, all revealed hidden priorities or latent risks. Vincent observed these indicators closely, adapting strategy and adjusting positioning to maintain stability, anticipate challenges, and exploit opportunities. Awareness replaced speculation, and precision replaced reaction. Conflict was approached methodically. Avoidance was preferred, yet confrontation, when necessary, was deliberate, controlled, and calculated. Every intervention was measured, minimizing exposure while maximizing outcomes. Direct action was a tool of last resort, employed only when subtler measures could not achieve the objective. Calculation and patience governed each choice, and impulsivity had no place in his method. Consistency fortified influence. Predictable behavior reduced scrutiny, while understated presence allowed operations to proceed without interference. Power grew quietly, imperceptibly, like the roots of a tree spreading deep beneath the earth, firm, resilient, and enduring. Daily routines reinforced clarity and focus. Meals, rest, observation, and movement were structured to maintain readiness and cognitive precision. By controlling small constants, He freed attention for critical variables, deviations in human behavior, environmental anomalies, and emergent risks. Discipline in small matters reinforced resilience when faced with the unpredictable nature of the city. External validation held no power over him. Recognition, fame, or praise invited distraction and risk. Success was measured internally by the continuity of operations, the maintenance of autonomy, and the preservation of influence. Internal metrics insulated him from manipulation and preserved freedom to act according to principle rather than expectation. The city's energy was dynamic, expanding and contracting in subtle ways. Vincent adjusted accordingly. Presence expanded when opportunity arose, contracted when danger increased, and observation dominated when patience was required. This harmony with the city's pulse ensured efficiency, minimized risk, and maintained strategic advantage. Simplicity governed all operations. Overcomplication created vulnerability. Streamlined processes, limited variables, and disciplined focus ensured clarity, flexibility, and operational security. Efficiency was achieved not through haste or visibility, but through thoughtful, deliberate, and measured action. Setbacks were valuable data. They revealed weaknesses, exposed vulnerabilities, and highlighted opportunities for improvement. Each challenge became an opportunity for learning, adjustment, and reinforcement of strategy. Emotional reaction was replaced with analysis, correction, and deliberate refinement, reinforcing resilience and adaptability over time. Boundaries were respected. Not every space required presence, not every opportunity demanded engagement, and not all information needed to be acquired. By limiting exposure, he maintained autonomy and strengthened influence. Strategic absence often carried more weight than visible presence, demonstrating that restraint was a powerful form of control. As night deepened, reflection guided him. Systems were assessed, alignment confirmed, and risk minimized. Rest followed only when continuity and stability were intact. Sleep was restorative, replenishing clarity and resilience for the next cycle. Preparation, observation, and discipline ensured that operations continued seamlessly, uninterrupted by chance or external chaos. The city functioned as both stage and framework. By respecting its rhythms, understanding its currents, and moving with observation, patience, and precision, Vincent Asaro maintained influence without dominance, presence without prominence, and control without spectacle. His quiet mastery of movement, awareness, and strategy allowed him to operate undetected while subtly shaping outcomes in his favor. And as the city's endless rhythm carried onward through night into dawn, Vincent Asaro remained deliberate, steady, and unseen. Protected by discipline, guided by restraint, and sustained by clarity, he moved forward, understanding that true power was measured not in visibility, noise, or recognition, but in patience, precision, and the subtle mastery of influence quietly, invisibly, yet enduringly present in every shadow and corner of the city he navigated so expertly.